Okay, I'm Jeffrey Kipnis. This is Architecture 200, which is basically a class about why architects would want to build crazy buildings. So the goal is to, there are several goals. One is to introduce you to architecture. Secondly is to maybe induce some of you to even thinking about it as a possibility of a major as a career. It's unbelievably fun. A lot of money, a lot of parties, a lot of travel, no work. You don't actually have to really know anything. That's the best thing about it, as you'll see. You don't even, it's not like if you want to be a rock and roll, but you even have to know how to play the guitar. You don't actually have to know how to do anything in architecture. So it's a particularly good major, and I encourage you to consider it. But if not, I just want you to I want to do two things. I want, when you see a bunch of strange buildings and you think, why the heck would anybody, I'm sorry, it's 200. I have to lower my intimacy level. Why would anybody do that? Maybe like the Wexner Center. I want you to, it's not about talking you into liking it, but it's about at least getting you to think about why they would do it. Give it a chance. And also, as we look at stranger and stranger buildings, you'll form an appreciation, I think, a deeper appreciation for the kinds of buildings that you like. So, I'm ready to start. The structure of the course is going to like this. Every Tuesday, I'm going to come in, I'm going to give a 1-hour lecture. Then, most of the time, I'll hang around if anybody wants to ask any questions for as long as you want, up to another hour. If you want to leave right away, that's okay with me too. It's optional for you. Today I have to leave early because I'm on a plane out of here. On Thursdays you'll have recitations with my gifted staff of, good work on these films, hey. My gifted staff of GAs, all of whom know a whole lot more about this stuff than I do actually. And they will be teaching you real stuff and giving you your assignments. You'll have, the grades are real simple. You'll have 5 graded assignments that are from the tutorials. That'll add up to 80% of your grade, and then there'll be an easy final, which basically is going to be a short essay question like, what I did last summer, and the only thing you have to do to pass that part of it is see the word count. It says do not write more than 75 words. So we won't actually read what you do. We'll just count the words, and then there'll be some 5 fill in the blank questions like my name is. So it should be real easy. It should be able to pick up another 20 points that way. Can everybody hear? Okay, I'll be working from this microphone.
If you can't hear, can you raise your hand?
No,
Okay.
that's not possible. You cannot possibly raise your hand if you can't hear since you heard. So
We'll try to get you set up with the house mic too.
that's okay. I'll stay here. I do this all the time. I do this all over the world. People film this all the time, but no one tells me. But now they're telling me they're filming this and they're going to put this on YouTube, and so I'm nervous as shoot. But since it's going to be on YouTube, I've decided to drink Coca-Cola during the whole time as an anticipation of product placement. Like maybe I can get them to sponsor this and make a huge amount of money. So. Okay. Did I stop in the middle of the sentence I usually do, and then I'll start it about 20 minutes later. So you have to remember all the sentences and all the fragments as I go. But are there any questions before we get started? Okay. You will get a syllabus.
She's going to have me turn up the mic.
Okay. Can I ask you to do stuff like make my lectures more interesting? Is there a button on there?
Unfortunately, no, not yet.
Brightness.
All right.
Okay.
There you go.
Where was? In the back. Is that better in the back? Yeah. Do I have to keep leaning over like this?
You can turn it further. There you go.
How's that? Is that bad in the front? Like, is this your first class out of high school? Is that right? No? Okay. We should discuss the interesting things that happen in college. All right, here we go. view, slideshow, start from the beginning. This is what most people think architecture is. And if you'll notice, you go into Lowe's and it says kitchens and bathrooms and ultimate homes and plans and stuff. And actually, if you really want to do this stuff, go buy these books, because that's how you do it, and we will never teach you how to do any of this stuff. We don't teach you how to do kitchens, plans, ranch plans. We don't teach you how to fix stuff. We don't teach you how to drywall. We don't teach you how to wire. We don't teach you how to repair anything whatsoever. It's too easy, and they do a better job of it. So this is not what you're going to learn if you become an architect. And this is my favorite one, and this is going to be the basis of our lecture today. This is 1,001 ideas for windows. Now, if you look carefully at that, there's 1,001 curtain ideas for one window, which I think is pretty good. You know? But so if you're an interior decorator, that's a pretty exciting talent. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is, what do architects do with windows? So now, this may not, don't worry, this is not going to be a lecture with a lot of old stuff in it that I think, isn't that fantastic? And you think, oh my God, how boring is that? Rather, it's going to look more like stuff like this. But this is a house in England called Hardwick Hall. At the time it was built, it was considered unbelievably radical. People would come visit it because it was shocking, and it was particularly shocking because of how many windows it had. What had happened, two things had happened. One is the glass tax, a tax on glass that would stop wealthy people from putting glass in their houses was repealed. So the glass tax was repealed. Plus the attitudes about houses at the time had changed. And instead of building them like safety and fortresses, they started to become much more open, socially open. And Bess Hardwick, who was the niece of the Queen, built this as her kind of weekend cottage. Now, this is, in fact, there's a very famous saying. It says, Hardwick Hall, more glass than wall. But this is the first glass house. Now, this house is famous. Philip Johnson, an architect from New York, did this house in 1950, and it's now called the Glass House. But what's interesting about this house is the phrase that you know, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, which was written by a poet named George Herbert in 1651. Many people think he wrote that because he used to spend his summer, this house was built in 1597 or 1600, let's say, and so he would visit there because Bess Hardwick was his aunt, and he would visit there. And so this saying that people that live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And one of the things that's sort of interesting that it took about 350 years to actually finally build a glass house. And if you notice, it's not completely glass. And these days we actually have a few that are actually no metal at all, completely glass. Now, this is the kind of thing architects do with windows. This is Daniel Liebeskin's museum for this is the addition to the Berlin Museum for the Jewish collection, the Holocaust Museum. And these are the windows. Now, if you notice, they're not about light, they're not about air, and they're not about views as we would normally associate it. So most people would think of a window as doing those three things. What do these windows do? They make the thing look, let's say, tortured, fragmented, broken. It's a museum, so there's not a lot of windows. So the light that comes in has got to be carefully governed. It causes different moods when you think about it. But more importantly, it shapes the view very differently. Now, if you think about this is a museum not just about a museum, but this is a museum about the murdered Jews of Berlin. They're, the Jews that were taken out of Berlin in cattle cars, in big metal cattle cars, on trains. And then they would look out through the slots, and they would see their world taken from their feet. So normally, they would see that, that was on the top is what they would see, and all of a sudden they're in these cattle cars and they're looking out and their world is being ripped from below them. When you're in the building itself, you get lost. Most people that go there are really irritated because it's so complicated that it takes 2 hours to get out. if you don't know your way around. Whereas most people are expecting to do, like when they go to a museum, maybe 40 minutes or 50 minutes. So the building kind of traps you, just like you're trapped in a concentration camp. And so the architecture is actually turning the experience of having been, as best as it can, as a kind of opera about the experience of what it would have been like to be a Jew in Berlin during World War II, and having you not just see the material, but relive the experience. And the window, and it's also about the damage that was done to the city in the war. So it's a great opera, I think, about a tragedy that occurred in human history, worked out in architectural terms. This is a window, this is a really famous window. This house, well, we're going to do a lot more work on these houses, but this house has got the most famous window in architectural history. In fact, this is really great. This is in 20th century architecture. You're going to be a contemporary architect. You really only need to know 4 buildings, and this is one of them. And they're real easy to learn. And they're all by the same architect. No, it's a joke I used last time. This is Le Corbusier's Villa Savoye. You don't have to write any of this stuff down. You can write it down if you want to. If you're out of state, you probably should write it down. Your tuition is so much higher. But this is called a ribbon window. And Corb's best friend liked that window there is called a French window. French window is just a window that goes from floor to ceiling and then you open the door. And they got in a fist fight over this window. They fought, they wrote against each other. They were best friends. They wrote against each other in the Paris newspaper for weeks and weeks and weeks. They ultimately got into a fist fight, big fight about this window, because this window seemed so radical at the time, because it's a horizontal window. You can't see the sky, you can't see the ground. What you see is the horizon. So it's a window about collective life. It's not one person standing at a window framed by the window, so that you see the sky, you see the foreground, and you see the midground, like a painting, and you're isolated and framed. Rather, a lot of people can see out together, and what they see is the activities of life, of the city. What's gone is the heavens and the ground. So it actually turns life into a film strip. And this window gets so popular. This is the second of the 4 buildings you actually have to know, the Glass House. And I just want you to see this because we'll come back to it in a minute. This is an architect taking a picture of, this is the guy on the left is Philip Johnson. He's really old. The guy on the right is Rem Koolhaas. Rem Koolhaas is the most famous living architect, perhaps other than Frank Gehry. He did the Seattle Library, and a lot of the buildings that we're going to look at are by Rem Koolhaas. Rem Koolhaas went to the Glass House to take a picture of Philip Johnson. Rem is standing outside so that you can see him being reflected in the image of Philip Johnson, who's talking on the phone. The reason he did that is that he built this building. Now, if you look carefully, on the top is that, and on the bottom is that. And so he's building a building that's not really, this is a house. It works as a house. But he's actually using these windows to talk to other architects and to people that are interested in architecture about windows, just like a musician might play a lick to quote from another quote, or just any kind of echo that would make the thing more interesting. And so these are the 2 great masterpieces of modern architecture now put on top of each other and made to do slightly different things. You'll notice it's not white, it's made out of construction material. The Glass House sits on the bottom, on the ground, and so it's a comment, actually, about the naivete of modernism, modern architecture, and the fact that it's in the city, and so it's no longer isolated in the middle of ideality. It's not perfect. In other words, these are both sort of perfect constructions. And this one is about sort of temporary. It's made, if you look at the corners are rough, whereas the corners of these are all perfect. And so the window contributes to the idea that you can discuss architecture by referring to other architecture in new buildings. Here's another window. This is another weird. Now, even in a very traditional house, this is the Venturi house by Robert Venturi. It's a house for his mother. You'll notice that this window on the far right is that ribbon window we were talked about. Then there's the normal window. And then there's a weird window up in the top. And then there's this little thing that looks like it makes the windows slide from one side to the other. Do you see that? See this little one windows here? So if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the ribbon window conventionally started to have 6 components. If you count there, there's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's this 6th one. So it can you can imagine it rotating back and forth. And this is a discussion of a very complicated idea in architecture called the formal diagram. But it's basically saying buildings don't have to belong to one attitude or another. People can collect anything, stuff from old-fashioned architecture, stuff from modern architecture, and make a new attitude. It's called postmodernism. But all worked out in the relationship between the house and the windows. This is yet another weird window. On the top is the ribbon window that we've been discussing so much about. So he's looking at Le Corbusier. In the middle is a discussion a little bit of these kind of windows. And then on the bottom is a completely new window. And it changes the mood of that house. So on the top you see you're above the world and you're looking out at the world over the world quite seriously. In the middle it's a kind of postmodern collection of junk. And on the bottom there's a completely new attitude. And that attitude, you're close to the ground. And that attitude is more reflected in the mood. So these windows actually set up moods. What's interesting about this picture is that this is the exact same view outside the window, but on the top, you're above it and you're looking out over the lake. Like I said, you cut out the foreground and you cut out the sky. And on the bottom, you're really close to the ground and it has a kind of cartoon-like mood. And so these windows are in this house to show you how powerfully windows can actually affect your relationship to the world without your even knowing it. I'm not so sure we can call this a window. It's a wall. We're going to go back to all these buildings we'll be revisiting. Instead of I'll show you new buildings each week, but we'll also go back and look at the buildings that we've looked at again and again in slightly different ways. This is a library in Seattle. The wall, it's all glass, the outside, and so the windows and the walls are the same thing. But if you notice, that garden on the outside turns into a rug on the inside. And so the idea that that it's not really transparent. You actually, even though the window makes it look like the same thing should go on from the outside to the inside, as you go from the outside to the inside, the world changes. The world changes from a world of fake nature, which is what a garden is, into fake garden, which is what a rug looking like a garden is. And so the window is used to set up that kind of discussion about what's real and what's not real as you walk into a library, where things are represented in the books. And polka dots are in. So the reason there's polka dots on the floor, they're in style right now. You know, a lot of polka dots. I advise you to buy polka dots. Forget pink. Pink is done. Also, don't put words on your butt. That's another piece of fashion advice. That's actually, I'm saying that as an art critic, just so you understand. Okay, this is a really famous window, and you're going to hate this window, but this is a window that's responsible for the Wexner Center. This is a building in Italy called the Casa del Fascia, the House of the Fascist. It was built by Terragni, Terragni. You don't have to write any of this stuff down. But a guy named Peter Eisenman got really interested in this building, and the thing that attracted his attention to it first and foremost is a lot of the windows open, but only this window, if you can see it, sticks out. And only this window, this is the only window in the entire building that doesn't slide open sideways. It pushes out like that. It's got an accordion hinge, as you can see. And so Peter Eisenman was trying to figure out why that was. And I'm sorry about this drawing, but he did a lot of studies, and he realized that the building is supposed to be a perfect cube. But because of the sightline regulations, it's about 3 inches too short on one side to be a perfect cube. And that window opens out just exactly in the amount to finish the perfect cube. Now, why is that interesting? Because all of a sudden, this window's got nothing to do with views. It's got nothing to do with light, air, pattern, decoration, mood. It's about the idea. This window is simply put there to complete an architectural idea that has nothing to do with experiencing the building. So it's the beginning of the thinking that architecture can be about ideas that have nothing to do with actually even being in the building, and that you actually have to know other things. You have to know the drawings, you have to know the ideas of the architect. And so it takes on, a little bit like contemporary modern art, it takes on a conceptual dimension. And so he draws these drawings, and then he started to do these drawings of houses that are all sort of based on the same sort of analysis. So you would see a house, and you couldn't understand why the house, and we'll look at some. For example, one of the houses that we're going to look at has a column right through the master bedroom bed. So when you're walking down the Wexner Center and you see that column in the staircase, the first time he tries to do that is he puts a column in the, so it's a very famous house. It's not so great for the husband and wife that live there. And she wrote a whole book about how much it sucked to live in this house. She, by the way, is the one who hired him. But if you notice, these drawings are exactly what you're seeing in the windows behind. So those windows in the Wexner Center are, of course, about letting you see out, but they're also about introducing you to an idea that you have to know the thinking behind that building, and we'll explore it much more later. This is Frank Gehry's house. Frank Gehry, if you know anything about architecture, you might know about Frank Gehry. He's done a museum in Bilbao, very famous, kind of looks like a gigantic flower or something. We're going to, again, it's another building we're going to go back to, but this is the house that got him started in architecture. And actually what you see is he bought an existing, you can see it in the background, he bought an existing suburban home, and then he added all this crap to it. And the neighbors went wild. They tried to have it torn down, they had tried to have it kicked out. It became the most famous house in Los Angeles for 20 years. So all of a sudden, the neighbors, it made the property values go up, so they're real happy about the house, but you still can't park on the street because of the number of young architect students that are driving up to see it. So he finally had to build a hedge around it to keep people out. But now, this house is probably not easy to understand why you would do that until you start to look at certain things in the art world. Now, this is a Robert Rauschenberg collage. And if you notice, it's just a bunch of junk put onto the canvas. It's got partly the tradition of great painting, partly formal ideas. You see the circle at the top and the circle at the bottom. And partly, it's just fun to see a bunch of junk. And so you can see exactly the same thing in this work. It's partly got some formal ideas, got some ideas about how it makes some sense. You can see you can see the quotation of the Corbusian ribbon window that's occurring there. So it's 1, 2, and there's 2 in the middle, 5. So that's, again, discussing all the Bonaventura house. This is the inside. So right on the left, you can see the traditional house, the outside, and then this was added so the inside the house is the old house, and then the kitchen is made in the space between the addition. Now this is the window that I think is really interesting, because this window is crooked. It looks weird. It's also not flat. It's a two-dimensional object. And if we look at this closely, you don't have to know anything about this window. You don't have to know anything about anything in architecture. It's like a song. You don't have to know it, but if you do know it, I don't have a pointer. Do we have a pointer? Okay, I'm going to point with this pencil. I want you to follow the tip of this pencil to exactly where it hits on the screen. Okay. So if you notice, look at the window on the top. Okay, it's a window that's flat, and there's that little window in it. See it? Now, if you look at the window on the bottom, it's the same window. See that little bitty window in it? But it's now fallen, because you can see the outside metal frame, it would have fit exactly in. So when it fell, it left the little window exactly unturned so that you would recognize it as a discussion of the window behind it, but it also became an object. So what used to be two-dimensional became three-dimensional, fell, and when it fell, are you cold? Okay, it is cold in here. One thing, architects, we don't like to live in the buildings that we build, So I come here 1 hour a week. I love this building. But apparently if you are a student and you actually have to sit here and work and stuff, it's really cold all the time, which is good for you, I think. We believe that will make you healthy. What doesn't kill you injures you badly. Now, this is, if you look carefully, where that window, which has become three-dimensional and rotated, it falls down to make the skylight in the kitchen. So it's all kind of connected. You know, it's fun. It's about how weird you can do stuff. Now, later on, we'll try to figure out why you do stuff so weird. All this stuff architects are doing with windows. This is a guest house in a beautiful area of upstate New York with a very famous forest. Now, generally, if you're going to be an architect and you're going to buy a guest house, if you're a building owner and you're going to build a guest house, you want your architecture to give you what kind of windows on the view? Big picture windows. So, in other words, that's your best view. You're going to be sitting there on inside and outside. You want to look out. You want to see as much as you can possibly see. But if you look carefully at those windows, they're not. They're all kinds of little bitty windows. They're breaking up the view. And if you know a little bit about art, you could recognize the fact that they're breaking up that view just like the Mondrian paintings. And so what the architect is doing is using the windows to discuss whether nature is real or a construction, like a painting. And so you get the benefit of seeing the view. You know, you'll see out that window as good as you can see out any window. You'll also get the idea that you shouldn't just take nature for granted, that it's part of a cultural construction, just like a painting is. And you can begin to guess that the person that bought this house was an art collector, which is true, because that's the kind of person that would appreciate that sort of play between the architecture and the view. This is called the Slow House. It's by Liz Diller and Rick Scofidio. It actually was never built. Half the projects we'll look at are famous in architecture, even though they've never been built. One of the great things about this field is you can get really well known and famous and not actually do anything. You know, you can draw stuff, you can make models, which is good. You have to understand, you might be worried, given the fact that the entire global financial system is about to fall apart, that you don't want architecture as a career, because there's not going to be any building. But that's not true. You can have huge and long careers by just coloring and making little toys. In fact, my wife, I was ordered by my wife not to mention her in any of these lectures, so don't tell her. But we do studios. Most of our teaching, you go to a studio, we say, build a hospital, design a hospital, and you sit down and you design a hospital, and then we scream at you all day long. It's a horrible hospital. And then after we do that for 4 years, you get out and you're professional. We don't tell you why it's a horrible hospital. We don't tell you how to make it better. It's just you have to get screamed at for 4 years to become a professional architect. That's just the way it works. So I did my first studio, and I got some of the most famous architects in the world to come, and we were discussing these little models. And my wife sat there for 9 hours, and I ran over to her. I was really excited at the end of it. I thought it was like a major success. I said, "That was fantastic, wasn't it?" And she said, "Well, I've never seen grown men spend so much time discussing dollhouses before." And that's kind of what the whole thing is like. This is a little dollhouse called the Slow House, and it's a house. It's set out on the oceanfront house. It's a guest house just like the one we just saw. I mean, not a guest house. It's a vacation house, a weekend house, except instead of having the view of the forest, it has a view of the ocean. And so everything about this house is about the transition from the city, the automobile, to nature. But what's really interesting about this house is this window. Now, this is a big window. And they didn't do what the last person did, Stephen Hall. What Liz and Rick did was basically make the biggest possible window they could possibly make for the money. Big windows are really expensive, so you break them up like that, they get cheaper. But what they did to make it more interesting is they put this television set right outside the front window, which is showing you on the TV exactly what you're seeing in the window. So I don't know if you understand it. So when you're inside and you're looking out the window, this is the end of the house, what you see is the ocean, and then you always see a television image of the exact same ocean at the exact same time. So again, discussing the relationship between what seems to be real and what seems to be representational, and the way architect actually constructs the real architecture actually constructs what seems to be real as a means of representation. The window, when you look out of it, you think you're looking outside at reality. But the window itself is actually telling you about that reality. Does it have a sky? Does it have a ground? Does it have a shape? Does it have a mood? Is it a painting? So it's always a kind of representation. If the thing looks like a big snail, see that? It's a big snail, got the two antennas. And it was actually based on a movie called Zed and Two Noughts, so that had a bunch of snails in it. So this is what we do, you know. I went to a movie, hey, did you see that movie? I love that scene with snails. Okay, let's make a house out of that. And, but that's one of the secrets you're going to learn in the tutorial. And then you have to learn how to lie about that. You have to learn to say something serious about it so that someone will actually build it, because you can't say, well, it looks like a snail. Now, the building on the left, you see the view way in the background of that's the view of the ocean that you see. On the left is a TV antenna, and the TV is beneath that. And on the right is the fireplace. So the discussion here is not just what's real in terms of outside the window, but which is the most important source of gathering for the family now in a house. Do families really gather around the fireplace, or do they gather around the TV set? And so the fireplace on one side and the TV set on the other, they sit there and they fight it out. You know, and so you come in and, you know, half of you are going watching the TV and half of you are going to the fireplace, and the family breaks up. And they get divorced, and the children sue their parents. And so a lot of times we're trying to destroy the lives of the clients that we, yeah. So, and you'll see that often, particularly when we do houses. Now, this is another project by the same architect, and what this is a little screen that looks like a window. And as it's going around the building, it shows you what's going on inside. And so this idea is a television set actually a window? So you see exactly what you would see inside if that were a real window, except when it passes the bathrooms, in which case you see, I don't know, something else, for legal reasons, I think. So a lot of work has to do with experimenting with what the technology of our contemporary lives does and how it affects the way we live in a building. Did you see, any of you know the movie Total Recall? You do? You remember when they were sitting in the kitchen and he had that big window out there and it looked like a great view, and the next thing you know he turned to switch? That's just, everyone has that now. That's a plasma screen thing. You know, so that was a prediction made about windows, I don't know, 15 years ago, which is now something you just take for granted. You can actually put one of those things up. Did you like that movie? I loved it. When the lady's head falls off. Next week, by the way, is all movies. That's what we do. Yeah. I haven't really prepared the course yet, so I had to buy a little time. So I put this old lecture, and then next week is just some clips of movies I just like. And then I'll figure out what to say the week after that. It's an interesting building. This is a center for dancers to go and study. You can't go to a theater there, but you go there and study. And so this is a Herzog and de Meuron. Now, why you would know these people, or did any of you watch the Olympics? Yeah. Did you like the bird's nest? It was really fantastic, wasn't it? In fact, I think it was everybody's favorite thing from the Olympics. After you got tired of that guy swimming, you know, he didn't win 8 gold medals. They showed the same race 8 times. It was like a camera trick, just like when they said we went to the moon, the same thing. But after a while, but you never got really tired of seeing the bird's nest, right? But do you know who designed it? I mean, it was really interesting about that. For 2 weeks, this thing became the discussion of the world. That and the opening games. Now, 2 things you should know is the opening games cost exactly the same amount, $400 million, as the building. You know, it's pretty amazing that you could, you know, it's like building a house and then throwing a party that costs as much as the house. They were really great, though. But you never heard the names of the architects. Herzog and de Meuron are the names of the architects. I thought that was kind of interesting. They would talk about this building over and over and over. The building next to it, which is the swimming cube, I hated that building. Did you like that building? I hate that building, whereas I love the bird's nest, and we're going to have to figure out why that is. But it's the same architects. Now, this is a building for dancers, not to go see dance, but to go study dance. And if you'll notice, it doesn't sit on the ground. The whole building floats a few inches off the ground. See? And you walk up the theater. Now, it's not true everywhere, but the idea, the architect is already making the building perform exactly the same tricks of ballet that ballet dancers form, to be on point, to look like they're floating. In order to do that, he's got to make the building seem as light as it possibly can. So if you notice that it's sheer, it's not actually glass, it's even lighter than glass, it's colored plastic. And so the plastic itself will work like a curtain. But then he uses these lines. You see these lines that go around the door and the window? To make them almost appear like graphic drawings on the front, to make them as light as they possibly can be. And that's how he makes the building seem like it's floating. And there is the floating. And so instead of, if you'll notice, it's not a curtain in the background, that's the actual building wall. That's how thin it is. And then look on the right. That window opens, and you can see two things. One is the column becomes a dancer. And the other one is, as you look into the colored glass, you have one kind of mood. You have the mood as if you're in the theater. And as soon as your eye hits the other window, the open window, and it falls out into that deep perspective of life itself, all of a sudden it's something else. And so the window and the curtain wall and the dance combine to actually give a really beautiful poem about the nature of art and art's relationship to the world. It's one of my favorite buildings. This is a good building. I usually make up facts I don't know. I don't like to actually say I don't know stuff. So a lot of times I'll just say the name of something or what it is and stuff. And usually most people don't know, or most people don't care. I used to say this is a hotel in Paris. It's not actually in Paris. Some guy in the audience, he screamed at me one day. He said, "No, it's in Geneva." So if you find out that I've said something that's not true, scream at me, or I'm here to tell stories. That's why I'm telling you, don't write anything down. I'm not telling you that because I just don't want you to get caught, Okay, this is a hotel in Paris by a guy named John Nouvel. Now, it was actually an existing building, and all he had to do was renovate the rooms and renovate the lobby. Now, if you notice, one thing you can see about the windows right away is look at the ceilings of all the walls. You can see pictures up on the ceilings. And then there's going to be this interesting window. Now, have you stayed at many hotels? Have you gone to many hotels? Okay. Let's just be honest with each other. What's your first thought when you walk into a hotel? Huh? Say it out loud. Does it have a swimming pool? Well, my first thought is, it's two thoughts at once. Where's the bar? And I sure hope I meet a woman there. I have never in my life met anyone. I've never met anyone in a hotel, and I've never seen anyone meet anyone in a hotel. But you can't help it. That's your fantasy. You're away from home. It's like Las Vegas. You're away from home. The minute you walk in, you think, this is it. I'm going to have my first affair. And so this entire... Yeah, it's on YouTube, I know. That's why I'm saying I never, my wife will watch this part. Oh, yeah. So the entire idea of the architect is to turn this into a place that takes advantage of the erotic fantasies that we have hotels. And so you're looking up at those ceilings. You can't quite see what they are, but if they're not mirrors on the top, if there's pictures up on the ceilings, you kind of guess what they are. Are they pornography? Are they films? What are they? And then there's this incredible window. Because when you're standing at this window and you're looking in, you're not actually seeing through this window. What you're actually seeing is there's a mirror there, and you're seeing the bar below. See that? So you're actually staring at the couple below, you're a voyeur. That's a way of further eroticizing your relationship. In other words, you're looking in and you can watch people and they can't see you back. What you don't know is that they can also see you back. So they can see you and you can see them. And that's all he did in the lobby. If you look at that thing over on the right, we call that a plan. A plan is basically a diagram of the building drawn in such a way that no one can understand it. And we do that so we can charge money for it. And like when you go to a doctor and he says everything you have is in Latin, and really what he says, you say, I have a headache, and he says, oh, you have a cerebrus, it just means a headache. But that's what we do. We draw everything like these drawings. So you see that's a really complicated drawing, and you'll learn how to kind of do one of these just for the fun of it. This thing on the left is called a section detail, and you have to draw a lot of lines. They don't have to mean anything, but the more lines you can get in there, the better. And you get paid by the line. So you'll see. You see look outside. You see the person standing outside. Like, what are all those lines about? They don't mean anything. This is the ceiling. These are quotes these are famous scenes from movies. Now, this is the last of the window projects. This is what we do today. Most of the architecture we're doing today looks like this, which looks like gigantic pieces of chewing gum that have been chewed and thrown out. Because we think a really great idea to make the world even uglier than we've made it and more difficult to live in. For example, how do you get in this house? How do you open the window? How do you shut the window? How do you stop But this is a really famous house. It's called the embryological house. Because it kind of looks like a baby, in the uterus, a fetus, and there's 10,000 of them. Everyone's slightly different. When we discuss it later on, we'll find out it actually has a political agenda. But these windows are some of the strangest windows of all because they're just in fact, we don't even call these windows anymore. These are called apertures. You got to figure out how to make things transparent, how to let in light, air, and stuff. But you also go, how would you put could you put a square window in that? Could you put a round window in that? How do you even poke a hole in a form like that and not have it look utterly ridiculous? And so this particular building is considered a breakthrough in this kind of work. And when you go outside, you're going to see this stuff all over the walls. So you think I'm kidding you. This is what we do today. We do this because you can do it on a computer. It's really easy. It takes about 15 minutes. You buy a program called Rhino, and you can pick like chewing gum, spaghetti, and then you hit another button that says color it silver. Then you had to figure out how to put these windows in there. Now, just so you'll understand the way technical language works, what this is he's shredded the isoparms of the surface. Does anybody know what that means? No, what it means is he looked at the whale shark. You know what a whale shark is? He looked at the gills of a whale shark and thought, wow, that would look cool, and I'll do that. And then he found a way to say that technically, so it cost a lot of money. He shredded the isoparms of the surface, and that's how you do that. And so we're going to study all this stuff closer and closer. Those are sort of some examples of windows. Lots of things you're going to see. Architecture is going to show up at a lot of places. This is Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. Long before Total Recall, this window looks like a plasma screen now, don't you think? And so that's the Wicked Witch outside, and they're in the tornado. So you're going to start to find architecture, the kinds of stuff we'll see. The more you become aware of it, you'll start to see it everywhere. You'll see it a lot in movies, a lot on television, as you walk around. Have you ever been to the Cap down, on the bridge at the Short North, where they have those restaurants and stuff? I want you, next time you take a look, as you go downtown, you'll cross a bridge, and there's a bunch of restaurants and stuff. It's called the Cap. If you look, have you ever built one of those little models, like a toy car or a toy ship or plane or something? You buy these models and you break them off out of plastic and you put them together. And if you're lazy like me, you never painted them, so they were all kind of look the same, glued together in the same color. That's exactly what that thing looks like. When you go down there, it looks like they bought a gigantic kit of plastic and put it up and forgot to paint it. And we're going to try to figure out, is that a good idea or is that a bad idea? We're going to be looking for architecture everywhere. I'm going to show you one more thing. Because I did this whole thing on about windows, but I could have done it about doors. Let's see. Oh, do you think this will have sound? If I play this, it should have sound. If it doesn't have sound, ooh, no sound. Wait a minute. Wait one second. Relax, relax.
Times long past, this planet was the home of a mighty and noble race of beings, which called themselves the Krell. Ethically, as well as technologically, they were 1 million years ahead of humankind. For in unlocking the mysteries of nature, they had conquered even their baser selves. And when in the course of eons they had abolished sickness and insanity and crime, and all injustice, they turned, still with high benevolence, outward toward space. Long before the dawn of man's history, they had walked our Earth and brought back many biological specimens.
I see. That explains the tiger and the deer.
The heights they had reached. But then, seemingly on the threshold of some supreme accomplishment, which was to have crowned their entire history, this all but divine race perished in a single night. In the 2,000 centuries since that unexplained catastrophe, even their cloud-piercing towers of glass and porcelain and adamantine steel have crumbled back into the soil of Altair 4, and nothing, absolutely nothing remains above ground.
What were they like?
No record of their physical nature has survived, except perhaps in the form of this characteristic arch. I suggest you consider it in comparison to one of our functionally designed human doorways.
They must have really been fat. I mean, like if I walk through this door, it's kind of my shape. So he thinks they were really bottom heavy. But it's an interesting piece of architectural theory, because what he says is they left no record of, we can find no record of what they look like. And later on in the movie, as we'll discover next week, it turns out that they did everything they can to get out of their bodies. So, according to him, we might get a hint from this doorway. Yet everything about the movie suggests that that's not right. But that's a piece of architectural theory in a film. And the more we do this kind of work, the more you're going to start to see this stuff everywhere, and it'll kind of drive you crazy, and that's it. Okay, that's it for today. Are there any questions? Okay.